Every few years, someone announces they have solved privacy on public blockchains. And every few years, financial institutions look at the solution and say, that is not what we actually need. Circle did something different in late 2024. They did not claim to have solved privacy. They said maybe regulated finance has been asking the wrong question entirely. That distinction matters more than it appears. The problem is real. Public EVM chains expose everything, not just who is sending and receiving, but how much, balances, transfer amounts, position sizes, all of it readable on-chain by anyone. For a retail user sending $20, that is fine. For a corporate treasury running payroll, this is serious operational exposure. For an asset manager holding tokenized fund positions, it is a competitive risk they cannot accept. For a bank running institutional settlement, it is a confidentiality requirement they cannot waive. This is why serious tokenized finance has mostly stayed on the permissions chain, not because banks distrust public infrastructure, because public infrastructure shows too much. In October 2024, Circle Research and a team from Inco Network published a paper introducing what they call the confidential ERC20 framework, cERC20 for short. The paper opens with a distinction that sounds simple, but is actually quite sharp. There are two things a financial transaction can hide. One is who is involved, the sender and the receiver. Hiding that is anonymity. The other is the amount. Hiding that is confidentiality. Those are not the same thing, and they do not require the same tools. Circle's argument is that regulated finance does not need anonymity. It never did. What it needs is confidentiality, the ability to keep transaction amounts and balances private from the public while staying fully visible to authorized parties on demand. Think about how Venmo works. You can see that your friend paid someone, you cannot see how much. That is not full anonymity. That is selective confidentiality. And it is how most professional financial systems already operate. So how does cERC20 actually work? The design is close to a standard ERC20 with one key change. Balances and transfer amounts are stored as encrypted data rather than plain numbers. The encryption model used is called Fully Homomorphic Encryption, or FHE for short. What that means in practice is that the smart contract can perform operations on encrypted values without ever decrypting them. You can add to a balance without knowing what the balance is. You can check whether a transfer limit has been exceeded without seeing the amount. What stays visible publicly: sender address, receiver address, and the fact that the transfer occurred. What is hidden? The amount and the running balance. For many regulated use cases, that is exactly the right boundary. Not less visible, not more. Exactly that. There is a second layer that matters specifically for financial teams. The framework includes what it calls delegated viewing. Different parties can be granted the ability to decrypt specific values without access to private keys and without touching anything else. An insurer can grant a regulator view access. A corporate treasurer can allow an auditor to see transaction history for a specific period. A compliance team can see the transfers that need review. Nobody gets access to everything. Each permission is defined in the contract and it can be changed when the situation requires it. This is where FHE has a meaningful advantage over zero-knowledge systems, which most people in this space know better. ZK commitments are powerful, but once you commit to a value, the viewing permissions are mostly fixed at the moment. FHE-based systems let you adjust access dynamically through contract state. For regulated institutions that need to onboard new auditors, respond to regulatory requests, or change access structure over time, that flexibility has real operational value. To be direct, cERC20 is research. Circle says so explicitly. The reference implementation on GitHub is a proof of concept. It has not been audited. And it cannot run on Ethereum mainnet today. It requires a chain with FHE-capable execution. But the work did not stop there. In April 2025, Inco, OpenZeppelin, and Zama co-founded the Confidential Token Association. The output was ERC7984, a draft Ethereum standard for confidential fungible tokens. OpenZeppelin has published audited reference contracts. Zama launched its own mainnet on Ethereum at the end of 2025, with the first live transaction being a confidential USDT transfer. JP Morgan's blockchain arm, Kinexys, published a proof of concept using this infrastructure for institutional tokenized finance privacy. This is not a startup experiment. That is the largest bank in the world validating the same cryptographic approach. And Circle's own Layer 1 ARC, shipped with opt-in confidential transfers as a day one feature, amounts hidden, addresses visible, authorized parties able to see via view keys. In May 2026, Circle closed a $222 million token presale for ARC led by Andreessen Horowitz with BlackRock, Apollo, and the Intercontinental Exchange all in the round. That is not a research paper anymore. That is a capital structure. Here is where we should be direct. The Cypherpunk critique of CER C20 is simple. The issuer has a backdoor. Authorized parties can see everything. If you believe financial privacy should be absolute and user-controlled, this framework is not that. Circle and Inco would say yes, and that is exactly the design. The institutions they are building for do not want absolute privacy. They want protection from public exposure and competitive visibility, with full auditability toward regulators when required. That is a different requirement and it needs a different solution. Whether you find that satisfying depends on what problem you think needs solving. For individual privacy, it is not enough. For institutional finance operating on public infrastructure, it might be exactly what works. The deeper point here is not about one framework, it is a shift in what the regulated finance conversation is actually asking. For years the question was, can public chains be made private enough for institutional use? The answer was mostly only if you build a new chain or move to a permissioned network. What CER C20, ERC7984 and the broader FHE ecosystem are collectively proposing is a third path. Keep the public chain, keep the settlement transparency, encrypt only the financial values that need protecting, and give authorized parties the keys they need when they need them. That is a narrower claim than what earlier privacy systems promised. It is also arguably a more honest one. So what do you take from this? CER C20 is not a live product, it is a research framework. But the thesis it articulated in 2024 is now being implemented across multiple chains, formalized into an Ethereum standard, and productized in Circle's own infrastructure. The key technical choice is FHE over zero-knowledge proofs, chosen specifically because it allows programmable dynamic viewing access. The key narrative choice is confidentiality over anonymity, selected specifically because that is what regulated institutions actually need. If your team is building tokenized assets, payroll infrastructure on institutional settlement on public chains, this is the direction the privacy stack is moving. Not toward hiding everything, toward hiding exactly the right things with exactly the right visibility controls in place. If this raised practical questions, how compliance rules get encoded, how delegated viewing fits your audit structure, how wrapping mechanics affect your token model, those are engineering decisions. And they benefit from being thought through early, before architecture is locked in. At SPO, we help build production systems in regulated fintech across the globe. If you want to think through what this looks like in practice for your product, reach out to us and stay on the block to stay ahead.